Joey Guarascio, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for giving up a little bit of your time.
Appreciate you having me on, man. I'm an avid listener of the podcast, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Read a few of your articles recently on deceleration. Just devastated that they're not on Sportsmith, but that's okay. That's all right. But delighted to get you on to have a little chat around deceleration, because I think it's and you know a lot more than I do. It's definitely a topic that is catching people's attention. Probably had lots of under attention and is now getting hopefully the attention it deserves through yourself, Damian Harper, who we had a little chat around beforehand. But before we dive into deceleration, training it, testing it, would you mind just giving us a bit of an intro to you, what you're currently doing, what you've done before, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I was a typical meathead in high school. I liked training a lot. I got to college and I figured out that I could actually make a profession out of it. I tried to dive in head first. Been to a bunch of schools, did a graduate assistantship, and then had the opportunity to be an assistant at Ole Miss, which really just opened my eyes up to just the spectacle that is big college football, and the training process and how you develop those athletes and being around elite athletes. I worked under Coach Paul Jackson, who's at Utah State, who's just, in my opinion, one of the best strength coaches in America. And then from there, I had the opportunity to go to Colorado State and be the head strength coach there. And then 3 years ago, I got the call to come down here to Boca Raton, sunny Florida, and couldn't turn it down. I've been here 3 years. We went to a bowl game my first year here, and we're in the process of hunting to get into the conference championship picture. I train football. I do have assistants on staff that oversee other sports, so I try to help them out as well with that. And then we, in the offseason, because of where we're located and just because of a lot of players I've had the opportunity to coach over the years, we do have a big NFL following as far as a crew that comes down here in the offseason, trains here. So alongside training our guys here, we do train a lot of guys that come down. We had like a group of like 20 to 25 NFL players that were with us in and out of the building, probably all the way from February through July. So, that's basically it right there for what I do. I program and plan for football. Anything that has anything to do with performance is going to be down my street is what I got to deal with. And, I try to help coach out with planning practices. Obviously off season, I'm the head coach in the off season. That's how it is. He turns the team over to me, and then I turn it back over to him at the end of July. And it's an awesome role. It's something I really, really enjoy.
As football, American football for our non-US audience, has football always been the ultimate aim to be head strength and conditioning coach at a college football team?
Yeah, absolutely. I played football my entire life. I played baseball too as well, and wrestling. I played multiple sports, but football is what has afforded me my lifestyle up to this point. It's gotten me where I'm at. I've always had a love for the game. I just never wanted to be a football coach because I hate recruiting and I hate sitting and doing film study for multiple hours like that. I can't do it. I wouldn't be able to do it. So I get the added benefit about being around the game, being around the guys, being able to mentor, being able to help them, being able to drive their performance, all those different things that go along with being in that and being around the game 24/7. And then, like I said, it's provided me a living. It's my driving force. My son plays football. It's just something that's part of my life that is always going to be part of my life.
Nice. So on the deceleration side, what was it about, or what is it currently about deceleration that's catching your attention and giving you the impetus to dive into the research and write about it?
So it always starts with a problem, right? Like you always start researching something because something's going bad. And in 2020, I felt in the preparation of our football team, I felt like we did a really good job from an acceleration standpoint. I felt like we did a really good job from a maximum velocity standpoint. I felt like we were strong. I felt like we were powerful. And then when we went back and we looked at, okay, what are injury trends? What are specific metrics that took a hit during the season? what we noticed is our RSI decreased as the season went on. Okay, but our vertical jump numbers were about above average or about on average from what we started the season at. Okay, and then with the injury trends, the one thing that stood out to me was we had a ton of ankle injuries. You know, and I know with injuries, you can't prevent them. So if people say they prevent injuries, that's BS. You can't prevent an injury. But at the same time, if there's a rash of injuries, there's definitely something going on there. So that offseason, one of my assistants happened to show me a Jonas Dodo, his platform, his online platform, and it had a deceleration course. And I'm watching the course. I signed up for it because I wanted to just expand my own knowledge and see what I was missing. And Damian Harper was on there a ton, and there was a ton of other people in there. And I just kept looking, and I kept watching the deceleration portion over and over and over again. And I'm like, this is a specific skill that we're not training, right? I do change the direction work just like everybody else out there. We do acceleration, we do maximum velocity work, we do agility work, but we weren't pinpointing deceleration. We weren't putting an emphasis on it. We weren't making it one of the 4 pillars of the program like it is now. And my mind went back to the ankle injuries, and I'm like, okay, well, a lot of times, where do these ankle injuries occur? Like, where do they twist their ankles? And a lot of times it was in a deceleration phase, where they got out of position, their foot didn't get down in the right way, and they happened to roll it. And that was one of those deals for me. It was like, okay, well, let's try to increase our deceleration capabilities, okay, and let's see if it has a positive effect on that injury trend that was going on at the time. And our ultimate measurement was going to be that spring ball period where we had 15 practices. We had 8 weeks of training prior to that 15-week practice, or 15 practices that came up. And what we did was we dedicated essentially a full day to stopping, to braking, to deceleration. And what we saw was in that 15 practices, we only had 1 ankle injury. So it dramatically decreased. And that was where I was like, okay, this is awesome, because now, just like anything, like we want to try to provide a vaccine for potential issues. We want to provide, that the solution to the problem that we previously had. The one thing that we didn't foresee coming, because I wasn't that deep into the research yet, was the performance side of it. Our guys we were hitting higher max speeds. We had no soft tissue injuries all the way throughout, okay? And then the thing that really stood out to me was our RSI in that period, in that 15-day practice period, was maintained and was even higher than when we started in January. So, again, so to me it was like, okay, we're checking a box that we previously weren't checking. That was something that needed to be trained. We weren't putting an emphasis on it. We didn't take it as serious as those other training elements, and it probably hindered our athletes, and our athletes suffered because of it, but we wanted to rectify it and make sure that we added that element of training in there. So now when we look at, like, I look at training and I try to simplify it in a way to where I look at there's capacities that every athlete needs to possess, right? And depending on the sport, they're going to need different levels of it. So I look at, they're going to need some level of endurance. And I think people bastardize the term endurance, right? Endurance is just repeatability of an action. Like how many times, whatever that action may be, for a cross-country runner, that's running. For an O-lineman, that might be change direction and, blocking, punching, okay, punching power, all right? All athletes need peak force. They need to be able to show and express levels of peak force, okay? All right, all athletes need rate of force development. So now that you have higher levels of impulse, or you have higher levels of force capabilities, okay, sports are regulated by time. Like you only have a specific amount of time windows available to you to perform a movement, whether it's running, change direction, punching, whatever it is. And what tends to be what we've seen through our own case studies here, through using dartfish and putting timestamps on specific movements, is they're all under 500 milliseconds, right? So when you go back to like Jaworski and science and practice, that's the explosive strength deficit. Like you're only going to have a certain amount of time to express that force. You better be able to express as much force as possible in that time parameter. So rate of force is critical. And then the last one is your stress shortening cycle capabilities. How elastic are you, right? Because that's really going to be where you start to bridge the gap between, okay, strong and then athletic. That's where I look at it. So when you look at those are the four capacities. No matter what sport, there's going to be certain levels that you have to obtain that are basically going to guarantee you that you not fail, right? If you're missing one of those in any of those sports, you're guaranteed to fail. Okay, so those are the capacities. Now, when I looked at, we're going to train those, and there's going to be specific ways we train that, whether it's plyometrics, whether it's strength training, whether it's in repeat sprint ability, whatever it may be, right, to fit those boxes. But then I looked at there's specific skills. There's general skills and there's specific skills to all sports. For like American football, for instance, like tackling is a specific skill. Blocking is a specific skill. A DB getting out of his back pedal is a specific skill. Okay, now these specific skills are fed by general skills. All right, and general skills for me in my sport of American football are going to be acceleration, deceleration, maximum velocity capabilities, and then the fourth one is going to be change of direction. So our capacities are going to feed our general skills. Our general skills are going to feed our specific skills. And that's kind of the continuum that we look at. And I didn't incorporate deceleration into that equation until after 2020. And that was a mistake on my part. I like a lot of coaches, like I was like, you know what, we're getting high threshold decelerations in our change of direction work. And that wasn't the truth. So like we have Catapult here. And what we did was we did an in-house case study, and we looked at, okay, we did a change direction session, and we looked at what was the highest peak decelerations in those. And what we found was that they weren't maximal compared to when we actually trained, okay, let's do a 10-yard acceleration to a full stop. And we saw anywhere between -5 to -6 meters per second on those deaccelerations versus in that change direction, we were right around 3.5. So there was a major drop off. And what I looked at is, and when I look at all training is you want to create thresholds and you want to create reserves, right? Like Charlie Francis became popular with speed reserve. Okay, if an athlete's faster, all right, if I go from 20 to 22 miles an hour when I'm tired, I still have a higher reserve to run faster than before. I look at that and I took that to heart, and I look at that for all training elements. I want a peak force reserve. I want a deacceleration reserve, right? I want my athletes to be accustomed to, -6 or -7 meters per second. I want to drive that attribute so that when they have to do -3 meters per second deaccelerations and they have to do it 30 times, that's nothing to them because that's 50% of what their maximum is. Okay, so that's one of the things that we looked at was like, okay, well, how do we increase that specific ability to handle higher threshold deaccelerations? And the answer became, okay, let's make it a priority in training. All right, let's pinpoint it. Let's teach the technical side of it because that's a huge component of it as well. Like when you look at soft tissue injuries, when you look at non-contact ACLs, a lot of these things, and Damian Harper's research reflects this, is you're going to see that it's majority of the time it's in a deacceleration capacity. Like there's a deacceleration event coming with a defender approaching, right? So if we want to, again, mitigate, because you can't prevent those injuries from happening, but if you want to mitigate those, train the technical side as well as the physical side of it, right? The actual ability of it.
So the first thing, I suppose, the most logical place to start is you had a problem, which was injuries. Other people out there may have a performance problem. We're seeing this on the pitch. Players can't get into particular positions to decelerate effectively. So let's test it. How have you gone around and about testing it? Because speaking to Damian, that's not as easy as may seem. So have you dived into the testing of deceleration with your guys?
Yeah, we have. So originally we were like, okay, let's make them sprint 10 yards, make them stop, single leg, we'll go right, we'll go left leg to see if there's asymmetries. And what we'll do is we'll just measure the distance from the cone that told them to stop to their actual stop point, right? So, all right, what's the distance in that? We got some pretty good data with that. And then what the issue was is, are we standardizing the velocity into the deceleration? And that was the big part, and that was the hard part to do. So what we figured out is guys are trying to cheat the test because they want to be better. They want to get better marks, right? Like that's every athlete ever. So what they were doing is they were pulling up before, and we're having to use our coach's eye to say, okay, that wasn't fast enough in, or that was slow enough. So what we did was we put timing gates. So we don't count the score or the data unless it's at least 90% of their best 10-yard sprint. All right, so because again, we want valid data. I don't want to just say and pat myself on the back because the kid cheated the test and he stopped 2 yards shorter. All right, we wanted to make sure that we're actually improving the metric that we're improving, right? Because this is for me to audit myself and my program to see if it's working. It's not for the coaches. It's not to blow their heads up and show how great we are. It's to make actual to intervene and actually make performance gains. So we introduced that and we had a lot of success. And then it came to the point where it's like, okay, well, what about the time to decel? Because that's a huge critical component of deceleration in itself. I want to be able to stop shorter, but I also want to be able to stop faster. And that's where we added in the video analysis from the side. So now not only are we measuring the 10 yards in, the 10-yard velocity in, right, the time in, but now we're also setting up an iPad on a tripod, and we're videoing how far it takes them to stop and how fast it takes them to stop. Because what I've noticed is my better athletes stop at a much faster rate than my athletes that are kind of like the average Joes. And to me, that's a competitive advantage, right? Like, because I can wait longer to stop in the competitive field, which gives me the advantage because now you talk about deception. Like if I'm running in front of you and you don't know when I'm going to stop, but I'm running at 16, 17 miles an hour and I can just put the brakes on and stop in 3 steps, like that's going to be hard to defend, right? Creating space. So that's kind of how we figured out you have the time. So you give them basically a mark for velocity entry into the deceleration. And then you got to look at time to stop and you got to look at distance of the stop. And then what we did was we measured right from left and see if there was huge discrepancies. And for the most part, there wasn't, outside of some guys that have had previous injuries. But it's fun too. Like our guys got into it because we can make it competitive. You make it competitive. You call out. We made a leaderboard out of it, just like, like Tony Holler talks all the time about like rank, record, publish. Like we do that with our guys and, like we tell guys all the time. They're all young now, but you've probably seen it. You ever seen the movie D3, Mighty Ducks?
I have, yes, yeah.
You remember the cat that couldn't stop? He was the fastest guy on the field but couldn't stop, or on the fast guy on the ice couldn't stop. Yeah, we tell them all the time, you don't want to be that guy. I had to show them a clip of because I explained it one day and I keep forgetting these kids were born in like 2002. I had to show them a YouTube clip of what that was. And then they all thought it was hilarious. And like, oh, okay, we don't want to be Rodrigo. Yeah, don't be Rodrigo, man. Like, you can't be fast and not have good brakes. Yeah.
Nice.
So we have fun with it. We measure it. We make it competitive. And, the more we've trained it, the more we integrate it, the better they've gotten at it. And, I think it has helped tremendously with mitigating a ton of injuries. Like knock on wood, we're extremely healthy right now going in our season. Everyone talks about the vaccination of hamstring injuries with introduction and exposure to maximum velocity sprinting, but we also forget like deep knee flexion, okay, and the mechanism of deceleration can attribute to hamstring injuries as well. So again, I looked at it was like, it's a 2-prong approach. Like we're getting deep knee flexion, hamstring issues. We're mitigating those injuries by exposing them to those, especially with those high threshold, high intensity decelerations. And then from the maximum velocity speed side of it, we're attacking it from that side. I was like, I felt really good about the fact that we weren't going to see a lot of soft tissue injuries going into the season because of those two combined in our off season.
So, Joey, just logistically, so you would have all your athletes max velocities, and then you'd get 90% of those, and they run as they go through the timing gates. That pops through. If they're over it, you can carry on with the process. If they're under it, they're doing it again.
Yeah, we throw that data out. We don't count it. So what we would do is we'd aim for about 3 reps on each side, and we would just write down all the times. We'd write down their 10 time, and then through the film, they're getting the film, so we don't have to go back and write anything down as far as that's concerned, because we'll go back later on and we'll go and break down those videos, those video clips to see, okay, where they are as far as time to stop and distance to stop, and then we write it down. But if the time in wasn't good, we just throw it out. We're just not going to count that data. You know, it's the same way like if you got a guy on a jump mat and he pikes, like you just throw the data out. Like we're not going to keep it. One thing our sports scientist Chad Herring did really well was too is out on the field. He had next to all the kids the recording sheet. He had what their 90% threshold of their 10 was. So like if an intern's out there and recording and it was lower, they don't even write it down. We just say, okay, we're good. We don't need it. You know, and then what we did was we made note of on the sheet, okay, rep 2 was bad, so that when we looked at the clip, we don't break the clip down and waste time and be inefficient. We can just delete that video clip and move on and find the ones that are right.
Sounds good. So from your experience and the research and probably coming back to Damian's influence here as well, what do you think the qualities, physical qualities and underpinnings of better deceleration performance with your guys? Then we'll get on to actually training it, which is obviously the good stuff.
Yeah. So again, I think it goes back to capacities. Like to me, and again, I'm regurgitating a lot of stuff that a lot smarter people have put out. Like my job is to take what all these smart people do and try to fit it into my program and put the puzzle together. So, you know, what I looked at is okay, eccentric peak force. All right, is going to be the foundation for all this, right? Like strength is the foundation for majority of our movements. So we're going to look at eccentric peak force. Okay, that's going to be a quality. That's going to be, you know, like I look at Al Vermeil's hierarchy of athletic qualities. Like that's going to be the bottom of when we talk about deceleration. That's the bottom of the pyramid for us. Okay, it's going to be that eccentric peak force. Then it's going to be eccentric rate of force development. Okay, so that's going to be the next one. And then as you move up that pyramid, okay, it's going to get into the ability to utilize stress shortening cycle. So now how do we take eccentric and turn it into a propulsive force? Right? How do we do that? Like, and that's going to be through the stress shortening cycle. And then the last one would have been dynamic stability, which when I think of dynamic stability, at least the way I interpret it and the way that I view it, it's going to be more of technique. Technique and timing are going to be key. So those are the 4 underpinning abilities or capacities that we look at and we train to drive deceleration here.
Let's start in the weight room when it comes to trying to develop these qualities. So going through those, so eccentric peak force, in terms of exercise selection, in terms of programming in the weight room, what does that look like when you're trying to build that base that you mentioned about the pyramid?
Yeah, so I look at it as it's going to be your submaximal lowering, right? So your tempo lowering, like what was made very popular by Cal Dietz and by Poliquin, your tempo, you know, anywhere between 4 to 6 seconds. We'll start there. And we'll do them with our main exercises. So whatever squat variation we're doing, whatever press variation we're doing, whatever pull-up variation we're doing, we'll start to implement those tempos into there. All right, because I think that's a good way to introduce it. I think that I don't want to use the word holy grail, but I think when you look at increasing peak force, eccentric peak force, I think once you get into super maximal eccentrics, I think there is a ton of value and a ton of bang for your buck. We're training super maximal eccentrics. Now, the idea is you got to get there in a safe manner, you know, and you got to progress it so that you're just not, you can't just throw them into super maximal eccentrics. Like, they have to be prepared for it, because it is a tremendous stimulus, and it is extremely hard and intense. So we'll get into those. Dr. Waggle and the accentuated eccentric loading have been a huge. They've helped us tremendously with their research they put out, and they've given us really good ideas about how to be creative in our setting, because we'll have 30 to 35 guys in the weight room at one time. And we're a smaller school, so we don't have weight releasers and all those different things to do. So we had to get creative. One way that we found that I really like and to implement super maximal eccentrics is I love Hatfield squats, safety bar squats, hand assisted, because what you can do is you could have them go hand unassisted on the way down and really load them. And then they could go concentric. They could grab that bar and pull themselves up out of that hole without really interfering with the technical side of the squat, or if it's a split squat or whatever it may be. And we've seen a ton of value in using those here, and it's safe. Like, I haven't had a kid. We've gone up to 135% of our 1RM back squat max, and we've yet to have a kid fail. We've yet to have just any kind of weird injury or anything like those pop up using that protocol. And then with upper body wise, because I don't like using a ton of super maximal eccentrics with bench press. I don't like. I've had a pec tear before, and it may just be because it's my own personal pet peeve, but I like to stay away from super maximal with bench pressing. But I do love super maximal lowering with overhead pressing. And you can do that by doing heavy push presses or even split jerks and controlling the load down. And I've seen a tremendous amount of value in utilizing those in our program, building up just the robustness of that shoulder girdle and that joint. I've seen guys split jerk 315 and 3-second lower it down to a front rack position. And those are usually my guys that press heavy anyway. They could bench press 405 or more and all those things. So, I've seen tremendous success with that, and it's safe, right? Like, if you can't lower it, you just drop the bar. That's the beauty of it. You just drop the bar. And then with our pulling exercises, I like partner chin-ups. So, like, you go up concentrically, you pause, your partner grabs your shoulders and pulls you down, not rips you down, but pulls you down and gives you that stimulus, and you lower for 3 to 4 seconds. And it's an easy way to implement it, especially, like I said, if you have a bigger room with a lot of athletes in it, 35 athletes, it's easy to implement, because, the partner goes and gets 4 or 5 reps, the other partner switches, gets 4 or 5 reps, and you go about your day. And again, it's another stimulus. I look at overhead athletes like our quarterbacks have benefited from that tremendously. That upper back strength is critical in supporting all the pressing and throwing that we do in this sport. And then Russian leans, and you can find ways for hip dominant exercises, whether it's a deadlift to a super maximal RDL. That's one way we found to implement it into hip hinging. We also, doing it with our Russian leans is like strapping a band under the bench, so you have that band tension pulling you down even more, and then releasing the band and coming back up. So again, it's really, once you understand the protocol, it's your limitations, your creativity, right? It's your resources and your creativity is going to be the limitation. But that's how we implement super maximal training for peak force, for eccentric peak force. When we get into rate of force, again, I like ALE for our jumps. So we'll load the eccentric portion of our jump. You can do that with dumbbells. You can do that with bands. As soon as they go to initiate the concentric phase or the propulsive phase of the jump, they let go of whatever implement they're using, and then they just jump. All right, and that's been really good for us. I like weighted snap downs because you can get really, really specific with positions when you get into those weighted snap downs. So we've used trap bars if we wanted to really up the load. You could get up on your toes, you snap down, and you turn it. I tell my athletes all the time, the coach cues, turn it to a statue. As soon as your hips crease and your knees bend a little bit, stop. There should be no excess movement. You should be able to hold it. Okay. I like doing them with dumbbells because now you can get into split variations, you get into single leg variations, all those different ways that you can increase that. And then depth landings are really big for us when you talk about rate of force development and eccentrically. So depth landings are going to be critical. I went into research and like Verzhansky talked about for peak force, like you got to start at basically like almost like 3.5 feet. It was crazy. I was like, holy, like 3.5 feet for a 300-pound old lineman would be insane, right? Like that's a ton of force. So what we did is we looked at, okay, what's the average vertical jump per position group? All right, so if I got all my old linemen, the average vertical is, say, 25 inches. Well, that's going to be our starting point for our depth landings, right? Because anything under that is not going to drive a stimulus. I could just have them do a vertical jump in place and land, right? I'm trying to overload the landing, which means that I gotta raise them higher than what they can actually jump. So we'll start vertical jump just to introduce it, and then we'll add 3 inches as we progress through the training blocks, and we'll get up to like plus 9 inches on their vertical. So like for some of our skill guys, they're dropping off a 46-inch box and just they're sticking it, they're holding it, they're not breaking at their knee, they're able to control it. There's no excess movement. And that's one way I really found to increase eccentric rate of force development and even peak force. And then obviously with your plyometrics, when you start to get into that stretch shortening cycle, you're also going to increase eccentric rate of force development by doing depth jumps and bounds and hurdle hops and all the consecutive hurdle hops. Just what majority of people already are doing, So to me, it's not overthink it. It's a lot of what, has been, all this stuff's been around forever, but a lot of what people are already doing from the stretch shortening cycle, from a plyometric cycle. People speak on that all the time. I think there's a ton of resource out there. But I think once you pair and you build into that stretch shortening cycle with increasing eccentric rate of force development, eccentric peak force, I think you really start to see your plyometrics take off as well.
How long?
And then from a dynamic stability, anytime. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go on. You're on a roll,
dynamic
Joey.
Stability. No, sorry.
Go.
From a dynamic stability standpoint, any time that you can get them like a landing is dynamic stability, right? Anytime you can get them to control position in a rapid fashion, to me, that's dynamic stability, right? So like even doing like a single leg RDL is dynamic stability. And we're going to get a lot of our dynamic stability work out on the field from actually practicing the skill of stopping. And that's where we'll get a lot of that going, or from our plyometrics. Like bounding is dynamic stability, right? When you land, when that ground contact happens, like being able to not fold and hold your posture and have great reactive strength and great posture to produce propulsively into the next jump that's dynamic stability to me.
What I was going to say was the tempos right at the start of the program when you're building this foundation. How long would you typically leave that in there before you progress to these more advanced things? Just to give coaches out there a little bit of an insight into that, where it fits into the week by week or day by day.
Yeah, so I usually typically leave it in there for about 4 weeks. And I like to add in the control tempo, and I also have the drop landings in there as well, and that's going to be my first progression into our eccentrics. And I'll do it right off out of the off season, right out of the detraining period, so early off season, which is usually in January for us. We'll run it for about 4 weeks, and we'll evaluate after that 4 weeks and see, okay, are we handling those submaximal loads tempo? Are we handling them better in week 4 than we did in week 1? And those intensities are usually what I've found, at least from practical experience, and then just from guidance from guys like Cal Dietz and Paul Quinn, is we'll stay anywhere between 60 and 85. I think once you pass 85% of a 1RM on those controlled lowering, you start to get into like shaky, like potential dangerous scenarios, especially if they have to perform the concentric action by themselves without any assistance. So again, because we want that concentric. We're hitting the eccentric part of it. We're emphasizing the eccentric part of it. So we want the concentric to be performed with good technique and in a smooth fashion. Like we don't want to overdo the concentric side of it, right? Because it is an early progression into super maximal. Okay, so We'll run that for 4 weeks, and then what we'll do is I'll build those drop landings, like I said, up to anywhere between 6+ to 9+ inches above vertical jump. And then going into that second block, if I have that ability to have another 4 weeks of training, because we're slaves to our calendar in the academia world over here. So sometimes I have 3 weeks, sometimes I have 4 weeks, sometimes I have 2 weeks. It just depends on how it fits. We'll move into the super maximal, and then we'll move into our depth jumps after that 4 week block, that preparatory block.
Just to confirm the snap downs, just explain that exercise. So it's dropping the weight, but obviously getting down there to catch it and stick it. Is that right?
So, like a lot of people do for like jump technique, where they put their hands over their head and they snap down and hold that position, that landing position of a jump. We'll just do that weighted. Now, obviously, we don't have a trap bar with 300 pounds over our head. But what we'll do is we'll get in a tall, upright position. And kind of like you said, is we want that feeling of falling or dropping. And then we want to, as soon as we get into that where our knees and hips crease enough, we want to stop that momentum and deaccelerate as fast as humanly possible. And again, that dynamic stability that comes in part with that, we want to turn it to a statue. I want to stop. I want to stick. I want to be strong in that position. I want to hold that position for about a 2-second count, and then I want to reset. And again, I look at it, it's very similar to catching a power clean as far as in terms of the mechanism. But you can increase the speed of the fall, okay? And you can increase the overall total load than you would be able to do with just power clean. So again, that's why I like that. I like that exercise a lot, especially for eccentric rate of force development. And then again, the more you load it, it's going to lean more towards and bleed into peak force. But to me, it's a great exercise, and the learning curve is fast. I mean, really fast. I got my 8-year-old son to figure it out in like 2 sets, because it's just get on your toes, flat feet landing, hips track back, strong position, turn into a statue, hold it. Be strong in that position, stand up, reset.
Let's take the learning and the development of these qualities onto the field or onto the track or onto the court, wherever people are. This is probably something that makes, more than often than not, strength and conditioning coaches a little bit nervous, probably less confident on the field, the track, or the court than they are in the weight room. So let's have a little dive into the program that includes deceleration technique development out onto the court, field, or track. What does it look like for you?
So again, what we want to do is we want to get them to where we're stationary, and then we add velocity to it, right? Because velocity is going to increase the intensity of the drill. So what we'll do is we'll have them, again, and a lot of the weight room transfers to the field as far as just the movement selection and the exercise selection. So like our weighted snap downs provide our first progression to true deacceleration, to bilateral stopping outside. Right, so I don't have to go revisit that outside and have them stand up and put their arms up and snap down, right? I don't have to do that because that's already built in. I've already done that at some point in that week in that weight room. So what we do is where we start our original progression is I'll have them stand up tall and I'll have them get into a unilateral stop. So we'll go right leg and we'll be up tall and it'll be a snap down, it'll be fast. And what we're looking for is good knee and hip flexion, okay? Good knee and hip flexion. I want them to get down. All right, I wanted them to get their center of gravity down as fast as possible. I want full foot contact. Okay, I don't want to be on my toes when I'm trying to stop. I tell our guys all the time, toes are for gas, heels are for brakes. Okay, I want to get my foot to roll from my heel to the front of my foot. Okay, I want my torso more upright and less leaning forward. Right, because once I add in velocity, when you look at from the technical side of deacceleration, I have to get my hips and knees in good flexion, but I actually have to keep my chest and my trunk more erect. That's going to help me sink and stop, right? If I'm leaning forward, I'm going to continue my momentum forward. So I want to counteract that by getting my center of gravity behind my foot and behind my hip. And the only way to do that is to lean back, right? Like going down the stairs. I tell our guys all the time, good deceleration looks like going downstairs. That's what it looks like. So what we'll do is we'll introduce that in the first 2 weeks by standing up and we'll snap down. So we'll go right leg in front. So we're up tall, boom, we stick it, hold it for a second, reset. Stick it, hold it, reset. And we'll do that for a few sets. And then what we'll do is we'll introduce it with an assisted element to it. So instead of running into it, we'll use a band. So I'll have a band. We'll tie two. We got lead FTS bands. We tie two of them together, gray bands, and we just pull them. So there is some velocity into it. Okay, I tell them a 3-step decel. So I say, I want your right leg. It's 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, stick. 1, 2, 3, stick. And we're adding that assisted element in. We're increasing the velocity. We'll do that, and then what we'll do is we'll introduce them to more high intensity, higher velocity entry decels with a 5-yard build, but we'll stop on both legs. Right? The wider your base, the bigger your base is, the more that you can redistribute that force amongst that base. So we don't want to just put them in a single leg right off the bat. We want to get them used to it. We get them into double leg decels. Again, you're talking about it's a very similar position to what that snap down is in the weight room. We'll do that for a week or 2 weeks. And then what we'll do is with our skill guys is we'll start to increase the gap of entry point. So we'll go from 5 yards to 10 yards to 15 yards. Once we get to 15 yards, we'll back it back down to 10, and then we'll start our unilateral progression.
So then what happens then with the unilateral progressions?
It just continues with the bilateral. So we'll just increase the distance. So I cap it at 20 because I'm like, after 20, I mean, it's sketchy, you know, and it's unrealistic because at 20 yards, my faster guys are going to be right around 20 miles an hour. And there's not many times that they're going to be at 20 miles an hour and have to put the brakes on that in that fashion. They're usually going to tempo and start to decelerate or start just to slow down as far as like their own actual speed. Because what we found was, and it's funny, I got in an argument with AJ Brown about this in the offseason, is I told him, I said, receivers specifically, because they're usually the ones that have the highest decel thresholds because of the nature of their position. Okay, followed by really the cornerbacks are the second in our case study here. What I got in an argument with AJ Brown because I was like, dude, you live at 17 to 18 miles an hour. I was like, every route you run, post, comeback, whatever it is, it's going to be at 17 to 18 miles an hour. And Tony V at XPE talks about this all the time. And he's like, I run at 20 miles. All my routes are fast. I'm fast. I run them all at 20. So we put the catapult on him. I had him run a route tree, and his average mile per hour was 17.3. And I laughed my ass off. And I was like, I told you. See, so a lot of times, again, in sport, you're not going to be at 20 miles an hour and put the brakes on. There's going to be a tempo into putting the brakes on. So I might be at 20 for a second, and then I might slow down just a little bit to 17, 18. Then boom, 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 rapid fire. I'm dropping that thing down to nothing. So again, after 20 miles an hour, our fast guys are at roughly 20 miles an hour at 20 yards. Like it's unrealistic and it's potentially dangerous. You know, we want to create a reserve, but we also want to train within a safe environment. We don't want to do harm by the athlete.
From a preparation perspective for the next movement, so like you said, very rarely an athlete's going to get to that kind of miles per hour and just stop. They're going to be stopping for a second, then prepping for the next movement. They change direction, going left, right, or going again, or coming backwards. What are you doing body position-wise to prepare your guys for that next one, for that next movement?
Yeah, so, I mean, you get into where you increase specificity of play, right? Like of their movements in play. So you're rarely going to see a guy just run straight ahead and then stop straight ahead, right? Like that's not going to happen. We're trying to train that specific or that general skill, right? We're trying to increase eccentric braking forces in that skill. Then what you got to do is you got to reverse engineer from the game. Like, okay, well, what are some predominant movements that they're going to stop and then get out of and go into, like you talked about? And a lot of times, so like our DBs, what we found is they're going to backpedal. They're going to backpedal, and then they're going to brake and drive forward or drive to a 90-degree or a 45-degree angle. So let's incorporate that in our drill selection. So as we climb that continuum of specificity and we navigate through that offseason, getting closer to preseason, we'll start to integrate those specific elements into our training of that capacity. Because that's the idea, right? Is that we want to increase skill. That's the name of the game. We want to increase specific skills. And if we're not getting close to those skills, you're not going to have that transfer and that carryover to those skills. So with our receivers, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, we'll go 10 yards and we'll have you break or we'll have you stop and then drive into a 90-degree cut. Or we'll have you run as fast as you can for 10 yards and then stop laterally versus at it straight ahead. Just little deviations to try to, again, up the specificity of those exercises. And again, I think you have to have a good coach's eye and you have to have a good knowledge of the game and position demands and just kind of figure it out on your own. Because it's different it's going to be different for a center in basketball. It's going to be different for a tennis player. It's going to be different for a quarterback versus a receiver, whatever it is. You have to go and investigate that and figure out, okay, is it close enough to where we're going to get some transfer? And am I still driving the general skill and the capacities that go along with that specific skill? Right? Or is it just practice? Like if it's too close to practice, I need to back down because we're still in the off season. I need to find ways to increase the intensity of it or to make sure I'm still on point training those capacities and that general skill to make sure that it feeds a specific skill. But they're going to get practice when we get to season. I need to bridge the gap enough to make sure that there's transfer to that.
So good. So much good stuff there. And I think you've exhausted the questions that I did have for you. So yeah, such good work. And I would point people to the 2 articles, I think it's 2 that you've done on Simply Faster. Like I said, I'd love that to be on Sportsmith, but I'll settle for the good info being shared on Simply Faster. To check them out, because there's loads of videos that many of which you've just described and talked us through there. But there's so much good info from the base in terms of your beliefs around the mechanics of deceleration, but also then the programming and the exercise selection. But Joey, anyone that wants to reach out to talk to you about this kind of stuff or anything else for that matter, what's the best place? Where's the best social media platforms to get you on?
I think either Instagram or Twitter, Coach Joey G. You DM me or hit me up. My email is listed on the school website. It's jguarascio@fau.edu. I'm always open to interacting too. I think I like giving back. I like talking shop because you usually learn more than what you give. So I'm always open to exchanging and networking. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to hit me up. And
there's some videos of you training your little boy as well. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's funny because I have my 8-year-old, and my Achilles heel has always been when I was an athlete was my top speed, my reactive strength was terrible. I sucked. I could vertical jump well, I could power clean the house, and then you get me past 15 yards, and I was like a Buick on flat tires. I just couldn't go. And I told my wife, I was like, we're gonna give our son, and knowing my genetics, I'm gonna give him every competitive advantage. And so we started training him, and we started doing some track work because track's a huge sport down here in South Florida. When I mean huge, I mean we went to a meet and there was 5,000 kids. I couldn't believe it. It was insane, right? And you talk about like elite kids. Like so one of the kids on my son's football team, he took 3rd at nationals and he ran 13-1 at 8 years old in the 100-meter dash. 13-1. He's 8. Okay, so competition's crazy. So my son, he's competitive. I was like, all right, well, you want to train? We could train, and we started introducing some track training to him, and I started posting some videos of him, and I got blown up like, hey, what program are you doing? What are you doing? This, that, and that. So I put together a 15-week program, and I put it out there for people to purchase. I was like, here, why not? Share it. And that's kind of blown up, and that's been cool to see people actually take some of that, the training that we do with my son and put it to their kids and help their kids out. So that's been cool too, to see that.
Good to see. Great to hear it going well. And I'd definitely encourage people to follow you on Instagram and Twitter because there's loads of good stuff. But Joey, thank you very much for giving up an hour of your time. Really do appreciate it, and encourage people to check those 2 articles out. And look forward to reading more and hearing more.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, buddy.